The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Colonel James Morrison reviewed the daily training schedules. At 52, he had seen everything the military could throw at him. 28 years of service, 3 tours overseas, and countless hours training America's finest soldiers had taught him to spot potential from a mile away. What he didn't expect was for that potential to walk up to his office door in the form of a 16-year-old girl wearing faded jeans and worn sneakers. Sarah Chen stood barely 5 feet tall, her black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like a shield, her knuckles white with nervous tension. The security guard had tried to turn her away twice, but she persisted with the quiet determination that would later become legendary among the ranks. "Sir," she began, her voice steady despite the obvious nerves, "I know this sounds crazy, but I want to join your marksmanship program." Colonel Morrison looked up from his paperwork, his weathered face creasing into what could only be described as amused confusion. Behind his desk hung photographs of his most accomplished shooters, all of them battle-hardened men who had earned their stripes through years of grueling training. The idea of this slip of a girl standing among them seemed so absurd that he actually chuckled. "Little lady," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this isn't summer camp. We train Navy SEALs here. These men are the best marksmen in the world. They can hit a target the size of a quarter from 800 yards away." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained eye contact. "I understand that, sir, but I believe I can do better." The colonel's chuckle turned into outright laughter. Not cruel laughter, but the kind reserved for children who claimed they could fly to the moon. "Better? Sweet girl, our current record holder put 15 rounds through a target no bigger than a dinner plate from 1,200 yards, in crosswind conditions, while rappelling down a cliff face." "Sergeant Martinez," Sarah said quietly, opening her folder. "15 rounds, 1,200 yards, 8-inch grouping, March 15th of last year. Wind speed averaged 12 knots from the northwest." The colonel's laughter died in his throat. Those details weren't public information. "How do you know that?" Sarah pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed around the edges. "My father was Master Sergeant David Chen. He served under your command in Afghanistan. He used to tell me stories about the incredible shots your team could make. Before he died, he made me promise to find you if anything ever happened to him." Morrison's expression softened. He remembered David Chen well. The man could thread a needle with a bullet at 600 yards. Lost to an IED 3 years ago, leaving behind a wife and daughter. "I remember your father. He was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to command. But that doesn't mean—" "He taught me everything he knew," Sarah interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "Every technique, every breathing pattern, every way to read wind and compensate for drop. I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. I can outshoot anyone on this base." Colonel Morrison studied the girl's face, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him of her father. The same intense focus, the same unwavering confidence that bordered on arrogance, but somehow never crossed the line. Still, the whole situation seemed impossible. "Even if you could shoot, which I doubt, this is a military installation. We have protocols, regulations. I can't just let civilians onto the range." Sarah reached into her folder again and produced a perfectly filled-out application form. "I've applied for the Civilian Marksmanship Excellence Program. According to Regulation 147C, any civilian with proper sponsorship and demonstrated need can petition for evaluation. My father's former commanding officer can sponsor me. That would be you, sir." Morrison took the application, scanning it with growing amazement. Every line was filled out correctly. Every regulation cited properly. The girl had done her homework. "This is all very impressive, but even if I were inclined to sponsor you, which I'm not saying I am, you'd need to pass initial screening. That means qualifying with a standard military rifle at basic distances first. I'm ready now, sir. Right now? Yes, sir. I brought my rifle. Morrison looked toward the door where a gun case sat beside Sarah's backpack. You brought a rifle onto a military base? I have all the proper permits and transportation documents. I cleared it with security when I arrived. It's my father's rifle, a Remington 700 that he customized himself. Against his better judgment, Morrison found himself curious. David Chen had indeed been an exceptional marksman, and if he had trained his daughter using military techniques, she might actually know which end of the rifle the bullet came out of. It wouldn't hurt to let her embarrass herself safely on the range. Maybe then she'd understand why her dream was impossible. Fine, he said, standing up. Let's go to the range. But when you fail to qualify, and you will fail, I want you to promise me you'll find a nice, safe hobby like photography or stamp collecting. Sarah's first hint of a smile crossed her face. And if I qualify? You won't. The walk to the shooting range took 15 minutes, during which word spread quickly through the base that the old man was taking some civilian girl to shoot. By the time they reached the range, a small crowd of curious soldiers had gathered at a safe distance. Rangemaster Sergeant Kelly Torres had prepared a standard M4 carbine with basic iron sights. No scopes. No special equipment. Just a basic military weapon that thousands of recruits had learned on. The target was set at a modest 100 yards, with a scoring zone the size of a large dinner plate. Standard qualification is 36 out of 40 shots in the scoring zone, Torres explained to Sarah. Most people need several attempts. Sarah nodded, checking the weapon with the smooth efficiency that surprised everyone watching. Her hands moved across the rifle with practiced ease, checking the action, examining the bore, testing the trigger pull. These were not the movements of someone who had learned to shoot from YouTube videos. The weapon is ready, she announced, taking her position on the firing line. Colonel Morrison expected to see the nervous shakiness that affected most first-time shooters. Instead, Sarah settled into her shooting position with the fluid grace of someone who had done this thousands of times. Her breathing became slow and controlled, her body perfectly still. "Range is hot," Torres called out. "Commence firing when ready." Sarah's first shot rang out across the range. Through his binoculars, Morrison could see the bullet hole appearing dead center in the target. Her second shot followed quickly, then her third. Each shot was deliberate, controlled, with barely a pause between them. By the 20th shot, the crowd of watching soldiers had grown quiet. By the 30th shot, they were leaning forward in anticipation. When Sarah fired her 40th and final round, she set the rifle down and looked at Colonel Morrison with the same quiet confidence she had shown in his office. "All 40 rounds in the scoring zone," Torres announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Perfect score. I need to examine the target more closely." As they walked down range to examine the target, Morrison felt a growing sense that everything he thought he knew about marksmanship was about to be challenged. The target showed not just 40 hits in the scoring zone, but something that bordered on impossible. All 40 bullet holes were clustered in an area no larger than a silver dollar. The soldiers who had gathered to watch began talking in hushed, excited tones. Perfect scores were rare enough, but this level of precision was something they had only heard about in stories of legendary marksmen. "How?" Morrison asked simply. Sarah shouldered her father's rifle case. "My dad always said that shooting wasn't about the rifle or the target. It was about finding the stillness inside yourself and letting the bullet follow your intention. He taught me that if you can control your mind completely, your body will follow." Morrison stared at the target, then at the young girl who had just challenged everything he thought possible. "This is just 100 yards with iron sights. Anyone can get lucky once." "Then let's try 200 yards, Sarah replied, with cross-wind. Second document. Word of Sarah's perfect score spread through the base like wildfire. By the next morning, half the personnel had heard some version of the story. Most dismissed it as exaggerated gossip. A 16-year-old girl out hooting trained soldiers seemed about as likely as a fish learning to fly. Colonel Morrison had spent a sleepless night reviewing Sarah's application and researching everything he could find about her father's training methods. David Chen had been more than just an excellent marksman. He had been a student of precision shooting that bordered on obsession. Morrison remembered now how Chen would spend hours after official training ended, working on breathing techniques and mental focus exercises that came from unexpected sources. When Sarah returned the following day, she brought with her a confidence that hadn't been there before. Success had a way of straightening shoulders and steadying voices. This time, she wasn't asking for permission. She was ready to prove that yesterday hadn't been luck. "Colonel," she said as she entered his office, "I believe you mentioned 200 yards with crosswind." Morrison had assembled a small team of observers for this test. Sergeant Torres was there, along with two of the base's top marksmen, Staff Sergeant Jake Rodriguez and Petty Officer First Class Mike Sullivan. Both men held base records in various categories, and neither looked particularly impressed by the teenager standing before them. "Before we begin," Rodriguez interjected, "I think we should establish some ground rules. Military marksmanship isn't just about hitting targets. It's about performing under pressure, adapting to changing conditions, and maintaining accuracy when your life depends on it." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand that, Sergeant. What kind of conditions did you have in mind?" Sullivan stepped forward. "Wind speed is running 15 knots with gusts up to 20. The temperature dropped 10 degrees since yesterday, which affects bullet trajectory, and instead of unlimited time, you get 30 seconds per shot. Standard combat conditions," Morrison added. "If you're serious about joining our program, you need to prove you can handle real-world scenarios." The group walked to the range in relative silence. Morrison noticed that Sarah moved with a different energy today. Yesterday she had been nervous but determined. Today she seemed almost eager, like an athlete who had finally found a worthy opponent. The 200-yard range presented new challenges beyond just distance. The targets were smaller, and the crosswind was strong enough to be felt on their faces. Flag markers along the range showed wind direction changing with each gust. "Target is 8 inches in diameter," Torres announced. 36 hits out of 40 rounds qualifies. Time limit is 30 seconds per shot, starting when I give the command. Sarah took her position and began her pre-shooting routine. This time, Morrison watched more carefully. Her preparation was unlike anything he had seen in nearly 3 decades of military service. She didn't just check her weapon. She seemed to enter a state of complete concentration that made everything around her fade into irrelevance. Her breathing became so slow and controlled that she seemed almost motionless. Her eyes moved constantly, reading the wind flags, calculating angles, making adjustments that existed only in her mind. When she finally settled behind the rifle, she had become something different from the nervous teenager who had first walked into his office. "Commence firing!" Torres called. Sarah's first shot came exactly 28 seconds after the command. The bullet struck the target just left of center, compensating perfectly for the crosswind. Her second shot followed the same pattern: calculate, adjust, breathe, fire. Each shot took nearly the full 30 seconds, but each shot found its mark. Rodriguez watched through high-powered binoculars, calling out hit locations. Center ring, just inside the line, dead center." His voice grew quieter with each call, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was reporting. By the 20th shot, Sullivan had stopped making skeptical comments. By the 30th shot, he was shaking his head in amazement. When Sarah fired her final round, she had achieved something that even the best military marksmen rarely accomplished under these conditions. 40 hits, Torres announced, all inside the scoring zone. Average group size. He paused to double-check his measurements. 3.2 inches. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Rodriguez looked at Sullivan, both men recognizing that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Morrison found himself facing a decision he had never expected to make. "That's better than my personal best at this distance," Sullivan admitted quietly. "In these wind conditions, I'd be happy with 6-inch groupings." Sarah safed her weapon and turned to face the group. "What's next?" Morrison studied her face, seeing not arrogance but genuine curiosity about her own capabilities. "Next is the question of whether you're serious about this. What you just did doesn't make you a soldier. It makes you someone who can shoot well under controlled conditions. Real marksmanship training involves months of intensive work, mental pressure that will test your limits, and physical challenges that will push your body beyond what you think it can handle." "I'm ready for that," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Are you ready to be the only girl in a program full of grown men who won't cut you any slack because of your age or gender? Are you ready to fail repeatedly until you learn to succeed? Are you ready to discover that everything you think you know about shooting is just the beginning?" Sarah's answer came in the form of a question that surprised everyone present. "When do we start?" Morrison looked at his watch. "Advanced marksmanship training begins Monday at 500 hours. That's 5 in the morning civilian time. The program runs 6 days a week for 16 weeks. The dropout rate is typically 40%, even among experienced military personnel." "I'll be here," Sarah said. "There's one more thing," Rodriguez added. "If you're going to train with us, you'll be training alongside candidates preparing for special operations assignments. These aren't regular soldiers. They're preparing to become Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon. The standards are higher than anything you've experienced." Sarah shouldered her rifle case and looked each man in the eye. "My father always told me that the only competition that matters is with yourself. I'm not trying to prove I'm better than anyone else. I'm trying to become the best I can be." Morrison felt a familiar stirring of respect for someone who understood the true nature of excellence. "Monday morning, then. Don't be late." As Sarah walked away, Sullivan turned to Morrison with a puzzled expression. "Sir, are we really going to put a 16-year-old girl through special operations marksmanship training?" Morrison watched Sarah's retreating figure, remembering her father's dedication and seeing that same quality reflected in his daughter. "Sergeant, I've learned never to bet against a Chen when they set their mind to something." What none of them could have predicted was how dramatically Sarah would exceed even their most optimistic expectations, or how her presence would ultimately change the way the military thought about marksmanship training entirely. Rodriguez was already calculating how to modify training scenarios for a civilian participant when he had a sudden thought. "Colonel, what happens if she actually completes the program?" Morrison considered the question seriously. "Then we'll have discovered something that might change how we select and train marksmen. But let's see if she survives the first week before we start rewriting regulations." Third document. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made long-distance shooting both challenging and exhilarating. Sarah arrived at the training facility 30 minutes early, her father's rifle case in one hand and a notebook in the other. She had spent the weekend researching advanced marksmanship techniques and reviewing everything she could find about military training protocols. The advanced marksmanship program operated from a specialized facility that most base personnel never saw. The building housed computer-controlled wind simulation systems, variable lighting conditions, and target systems that could replicate combat scenarios with startling realism. This was where the military's most elite marksmen came to push their skills beyond normal human limitations. Sarah's fellow trainees began arriving at 0445 hours. 8 men, all of them active-duty military personnel with years of experience. The youngest was 24, the oldest was 32. Each had already proven themselves exceptional marksmen by conventional standards. Each looked at Sarah with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Hayes ran the program with the efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years turning good shooters into legendary ones. At 55, he had trained more elite marksmen than any other instructor in the military. His reputation was built on an uncompromising dedication to excellence that had no patience for anything less than perfection. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began, his voice carrying the authority that came from absolute expertise. "Welcome to Advanced Marksmanship. Over the next 16 weeks, we will determine who among you has the potential to become an elite military marksman. Most of you will not succeed. This is not because you lack talent, but because excellence requires more than talent. It requires mental discipline that borders on obsession and physical conditioning that most people cannot sustain." His eyes moved across the group, pausing briefly when they reached Sarah. "This program has graduated 137 students in its 15-year history. 12 of those graduates have set military marksmanship records that still stand today. If you complete this training, you will join the most exclusive group of marksmen in the United States military." Hayes walked to a wall covered with photographs of previous graduates. "Your training will culminate in an attempt to qualify for the precision marksmanship team that supports our most classified operations. The current qualification standard requires hitting targets at distances up to 1,500 yards in variable weather conditions, under time pressure, and while managing physical stress that simulates combat situations." Sarah raised her hand. "Master Chief, what's the current record for the final qualification?" Hayes studied her for a moment before answering. "The record is held by Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson. 15 shots at 1,500 yards, 10-inch target zone, 30-knot crosswind, while wearing full combat gear. He achieved 14 hits with an average group size of 4.6 inches. That record has stood for 3 years. One of the other trainees, a Navy SEAL named Peterson, spoke up. "Master Chief, with all due respect, what's a civilian doing in this program?" Hayes's expression didn't change. "Miss Chen is here because she demonstrated marksmanship capabilities that warrant evaluation. Her status as a civilian is irrelevant to her ability to hit targets. If anyone has concerns about training alongside a civilian, you're free to drop out now." The silence that followed made it clear that no one was dropping out, but the tension in the room had increased noticeably. The first week of training focused on fundamentals, but at a level that redefined what fundamentals meant. They practiced breathing techniques that allowed for perfect stillness between heartbeats. They learned to read atmospheric conditions with precision that bordered on supernatural. They studied ballistics calculations that took into account factors most marksmen never considered. Sarah struggled initially, not with the shooting but with the physical conditioning that accompanied the training. Running 5 miles in full gear while carrying a 15-pound rifle tested limits she didn't know she had. The men in her class had years of military fitness behind them. She had only her determination and the memory of her father's belief in her capabilities. But when they reached the firing line, something extraordinary happened. Sarah didn't just keep up with her classmates. She consistently outperformed them. Her groups were tighter, her calculations more precise, her adaptation to changing conditions faster and more accurate. By the 3rd week, Peterson had stopped making comments about civilians. By the 6th week, he was asking Sarah for advice on breathing techniques. By the 8th week, Hayes had begun using Sarah's targets as examples of proper form for the rest of the class. The breakthrough came during week 10, when they attempted their first 1,500-yard shots. This was the distance that separated good marksmen from legendary ones. At 1,500 yards, bullets dropped nearly 40 feet and took almost 2 seconds to reach the target. Wind could push a bullet several feet off course. The margin for error was measured in fractions of inches. Hayes set up the exercise with conditions that replicated the qualification test. Full combat gear, time pressure, variable wind conditions, and a target that looked impossibly small through the scope. 7 of the 8 military trainees managed to hit the target at least once. Sarah hit it 13 times out of 15 attempts, with a group size that made Hayes check his measuring equipment twice. "How?" Peterson asked afterward, genuine curiosity replacing any trace of skepticism. Sarah considered the question seriously. "My father taught me that precision shooting isn't about fighting the conditions. It's about becoming part of them. You don't compete against the wind. You dance with it. You don't struggle with the distance. You embrace it." Hayes had been listening to the conversation. "Miss Chen, I want you to attempt the qualification record next week." The challenge spread through the base like lightning. Word reached Colonel Morrison, who arranged to observe. By the day of the attempt, nearly 50 personnel had found reasons to be near the range. The conditions were deliberately challenging. 35-knot winds with shifting directions, temperature variations that affected ballistics, full combat gear that added weight and restricted movement. The target was a 10-inch circle at 1,500 yards, barely visible even through high-powered optics. Sarah took her position with the calm that had become her trademark. She spent 10 minutes reading the wind, making calculations, and preparing mentally for the attempt. When Hayes gave the command to commence firing, she had entered that state of perfect concentration that made everything else disappear. Her first shot struck the target 2 inches left of center, perfect compensation for wind drift. Her second shot moved closer to center. By her 5th shot, she had found the rhythm that would make history. Shot after shot found the target with mechanical precision. The spotters calling out hits fell silent as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. When Sarah fired her 15th and final round, the target bore 15 bullet holes clustered in an area no larger than a baseball. Hayes examined the target through his spotting scope, checking and rechecking his measurements. Finally, he announced the results that would become military legend. 15 hits out of 15 attempts, average group size 2.8 inches. This is a new military marksmanship record. The applause that erupted was genuine and sustained. Even Peterson, who had started the program skeptical of Sarah's presence, was cheering along with everyone else. Colonel Morrison approached Sarah as she safed her weapon. "Congratulations, Miss Chen. You've accomplished something extraordinary." Sarah looked at the target, then at the crowd of military personnel who had witnessed her achievement. "Thank you, sir, but this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Hayes overheard the comment. "Beginning of what?" Sarah shouldered her rifle case the same way she had that first day when she walked into Morrison's office. "My father always said that excellence isn't a destination. It's a way of traveling. I want to see how far this path can take me." As she walked away from the range, Sarah carried with her not just a new military record, but the knowledge that she had honored her father's memory in the most meaningful way possible. She had proven that dedication, training, and an unwavering commitment to excellence could overcome any barrier, even the skepticism of those who couldn't imagine that greatness might come in an unexpected package. The young girl who had been dismissed with a chuckle had become the marksman who redefined what was possible. Her record would stand as proof that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements come from the most unexpected sources, and that true excellence recognizes no boundaries except those we impose on ourselves.